3 islands, 3 escapes from the world, 3 encounters with something that proves you can never truly run far enough. My name is Marcus, and this first story happened just last year. I was 22, completely drained from work, navigating a messy chapter of my life I was desperate to leave behind. I needed to vanish for a few days. A coworker mentioned a tiny island off the Maine coast, quiet, no nightlife, practically deserted after sunset. It sounded perfect. I found a rental cottage online for almost nothing, available immediately. That should have been my first warning. The place was a single room perched near the shoreline, surrounded by thick brush on 3 sides. A thin, almost see-through curtain covered the ocean-facing window. The walls were paper-thin. I could hear the wind scratching through the undergrowth. A new deadbolt and chain lock seemed freshly installed, which felt odd for such an isolated spot, but I dismissed it. I took the late ferry, walked the island as tourists departed, and watched the place empty out. By sunset, it was just me and the ocean. I grabbed dinner at a small pub. The bartender's expression shifted when I mentioned my rental. On the walk back, I passed a small dock tucked into a cove near the cottage. A single blue motorboat was moored there, out of place among the larger fishing vessels. I noted it, then forgot it. Back at the cottage around 10:30, I double-locked the door and settled in. Peace, finally. Until I realized my phone wouldn't charge. Dead outlet, dead charger. Whatever the reason, my battery was draining fast. No service soon. Exhausted, I decided to just sleep. I woke suddenly in the dead of night. Footsteps on gravel. Close. Right outside the door. Slow, deliberate steps with long pauses between them. I held my breath. The footsteps stopped. Silence stretched into minutes. Then they returned, closer this time, approaching the entrance. A flashlight beam swept across the thin curtain. A hand tried the handle. The deadbolt held. Then harder pressure, then banging, loud, violent impacts that shook the doorframe. Adrenaline flooded me. I jumped out of bed and crouched behind the door, ready for it to splinter. Then, silence, and a voice, calm and close. "I know you're in there, Marcus." My blood turned to ice. He knew my name. The footsteps circled the cottage slowly, deliberately for what felt like an hour. Then they receded toward the dock. An outboard motor coughed to life and faded across the water. I didn't sleep. At first light, I found boot prints circling the cottage multiple times, leading straight to the water's edge. He didn't come from the island. He came by boat. Specifically for that cottage, that night, knowing my name. I confronted my coworker, who swore he told no one. I believed him. I have a past, colorful enough that someone might want to find me. But how did they track me to a random island rental? How long had they been watching? I still work the same job, live in the same place. Nothing has changed. And I have no reason to believe it's over. The scariest thing isn't being found, it's realizing you never knew you were being watched. This next account comes from a structural engineer named David. Years ago, his graduate research on coastal concrete degradation earned him an invitation to Japan. A professor he'd been corresponding with, Dr. Yamamoto, arranged something extraordinary. Access to Hashima Island, the abandoned mining facility off Nagasaki, a crumbling battleship-shaped graveyard of concrete apartment blocks frozen in decay since the 1970s. Tourists stick to a safe path along the seawall. David's research permit allowed him inside the forbidden structures. He signed endless waivers and took a private ferry with his escort, a silent, disinterested man named Takeshi. The island's scale was overwhelming. For hours, David photographed and documented, while Takeshi followed at a distance, checking his watch, clearly wanting it over with. Inside a residential block around midday, Takeshi waited on the ground floor while David climbed to the fourth. Examining a wall, David noticed something strange. The dust patterns were disturbed. A path had been worn through decades of grime, leading to a room at the end of the corridor. Curiosity overriding caution, he followed it. The room hit him with two impossibilities. First, a smell, unnatural, unrecognizable, like nothing he'd ever encountered. Second, the wall was warm. Not sun-warmed, there were no gaps in the ceiling, but noticeably hotter than any other surface on the island. He descended and mentioned it to Takeshi. Takeshi's reaction was wrong. No curiosity, no concern, just flat denial. Impossible. No one lives there. He refused to even look. As the tour continued, David kept noticing signs, markings, disturbances, evidence that something had been there. When he mentioned more sightings, Takeshi pulled out a radio and spoke rapid Japanese. When asked, he claimed he was checking the schedule. David didn't believe him. They reached a taller residential block. Takeshi hesitated at the entrance, a flicker of something David couldn't read, then followed. On the fifth floor, in a corner room, David found it. A pile of blankets, empty water bottles, definitive proof of human habitation. He turned to show Takeshi. Takeshi was gone. Alone, the fear hit like a wave. He rushed back to the stairwell, blocked by fresh rubble. Not collapsed, piled. He ran, down corridors, through the maze, and behind him, footsteps. Not one set, multiple. He didn't turn around. He just ran until he burst into daylight, across open ground, to the dock. Takeshi stood there by the boat, utterly calm. David screamed at him about the people, the rubble, being abandoned. Takeshi didn't react. He just said, "We're leaving." David had to ride the ferry back beside him, terrified, powerless. He tried to report it, to contact Dr. Yamamoto. Yamamoto had vanished. No response, ever. Years later, David still tells this story. Some doors don't just close behind you, they erase the people who open them. This final story is from a historian named Evan. Over a decade ago, during his senior year, he was writing his thesis on abandoned institutional spaces. One case study was North Brother Island in New York's East River, a quarantine hospital, then a rehab center, abandoned for decades, off limits to the public. He mentioned it to two friends, Jansen and Jesse, during a night of drinking. They were urban exploration enthusiasts and became obsessed with visiting. Against his better judgment, Evan agreed. At 2 a.m., they launched 3 kayaks from the Bronx, paddling the half-mile through dark water. Pulling ashore through overgrowth, they stood on the island. It was impossibly quiet, half a mile from the city, but feeling like another world. Crumbling buildings, trees splitting structures in half, nature reclaiming everything. They explored for a while. Jansen found a half-empty spray paint can and wanted to tag something. Evan refused to participate, but didn't stop them, wandering off alone to take notes. That was his mistake. Walking a long hospital corridor, he heard Jesse's voice call his name from somewhere ahead. He called back. A response came from a nearby room.
Jesse's voice saying, "In here." He stepped through the dark doorway, swept his flashlight, and saw a figure in the far corner, tall, easily 6.5 feet, facing the wall. Not his friends, nothing close. Evan screamed and ran, yelling them to flee. They ran together to the kayaks. As they caught their breath, he told them what he'd seen. They didn't believe him until they all heard it. A moan, an old woman's cry of pain, drifting from the darkness behind them. They launched and paddled back in terror. In the car, they dissected every detail, and Evan kept coming back to one thing, that first voice. It was Jesse's voice. He knew it intimately, but Jesse had been
with Jensen the whole time, nowhere near that corridor. Years later, Evan still can't explain it. He doesn't believe in ghosts, but something was on that island with them. Something that knew his name. Something that could sound exactly like his friend. The most convincing lies are the ones that sound exactly like the truth. If these stories pulled you into their isolated terror, show your support. Leave a like on this video right now and subscribe to Winds of Thought. Your engagement keeps these narratives alive. Stay aware out there. You never know who's watching from the next island over.